Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Monday, the 17th of November. You're tuned in to our mid-morning newscast here on Arirang TV. Thanks ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. Korea's three-year innovation plan is hailed at the G20 summit in Brisbane. World leaders also finalized a plan to boost global GDP by more than $2 trillion by the end of the decade. The White House confirms a video released by Islamic State shows American hostage Peter Kazik has been killed. It also shows the mass beheading of several captured Syrian soldiers. Plus, the proportion of Korea's exports to Japan in the first 9 months of the year slumped to a record low amid the continued currency depreciation in Japan. Our top story this morning, President Park Geun-hye is back on Korean soil after wrapping up a series of multilateral talks in Asia and Australia on the global economy and security. Her final port of call was Brisbane for the G20 summit, which wrapped up on Sunday. Now, under growing pressure to do more to jolt the sluggish world economy back into life, G20 nations finalized a plan to boost global GDP by more than $2 trillion over 5 years. They plan to do this by investing in infrastructure and increasing trade. Every nation submitted a growth strategy, and Korea's national economic plans were commended, with some parts even included in an action plan drawn up by world leaders. Our Chae-sun starts us off.
The Korean government's three-year economic innovation plan has been hailed at the G20 summit in Australia. The plan aims to spur growth and expand the job market through social reforms, deregulation, and support for the creative industries.
Korea's expected GDP growth, as based on the three-year economic innovation plan, was found to be the highest among the G20 nations.
While predicting the G20's combined GDP could expand 2.1% from the current trend in 2018, given that their submitted strategies are carried out, the IMF and the OECD, which assess the strategies, said Korea's GDP could grow 4.4%. In fact, key policies in Korea's plan have been included in the Brisbane Action Plan. In addition to overcoming low growth, another main theme at this year's G20 was how to achieve global economic resilience. In line with this, President Park Geun-hye called on developed nations to be more careful when adjusting their currency policies, as that could have a negative effect on emerging economies.
The president said that developed nations' policies that only consider the domestic economy could lead to a negative spillover in emerging economies, and this in return could spill back into the advanced economies.
This was thought to have been the Korean president's indirect way of raising concerns about the depreciation of the Japanese yen. Although unable to unite around one policy on the matter, the G20 member countries have agreed to monitor the spillover and discourage currency devaluation for the sake of competitiveness. Chae-sun, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea's senior Communist Party official Choi Ryong-hae embarks on a week-long trip to Russia on this Monday as a special envoy for leader Kim Jong-un. Choi is expected to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. The two will likely discuss their country's ties and ways to strengthen their economic cooperation. It could also be a precursor to a visit by the North Korean leader, as Pyongyang's ties with its traditional ally China have deteriorated somewhat. Choi is also expected to ask for Russia's cooperation to bar the UN Security Council from passing a resolution on the North's grave human rights situation. The North Korean official is also scheduled to visit cities in Russia's Far East. Now, the US spy chief who traveled to North Korea early this month says North Korean officials told him they don't want Washington kicking up a fuss about its human rights situation. James Clapper, the US Director of National Intelligence, made the remarks over the weekend during an interview with US network CBS, where he talked about his trip to the north to secure the release of 2 American detainees. Clapper said officials in Pyongyang criticized the US for attempting to intervene in their internal matters. He added that he got the impression the North felt it was under siege somewhat. During his brief trip, Clapper met with North Korea's Minister of State Security, General Kim Won-hong, and top intelligence official Kim Young-chol. Now, increased patrols by North Korean soldiers near the border have triggered a sharp jump in the number of warning shots fired by the South Korean military. A government source in Seoul says South Korean troops have fired warning shots 5 or 6 times this year. Compare that to none fired the whole of last year. The source adds the South Korean military has issued well over 50 verbal warnings so far this year as well. While the South analyses North Korea's intentions, really, some military officials believe Pyongyang is trying to test the South's combat readiness. Late last week, North Korea warned Seoul against firing warning shots across the border, saying such provocations could trigger a war. Now, South Korea's parliament is abuzz with activity as the rival parties begin consideration of next year's budget proposal. The big question, though, is will they be able to get through the negotiations and pass the proposal by the November 30th deadline? Our Park Ji-won reports.
The National Assembly's Budget Committee began a review of the $340 billion budget for 2015 on Sunday. It is rare for the Budget Committee to meet on Sunday, which demonstrates lawmakers' resolve to pass the budget bill by the November 30th deadline. But it won't be easy. The rival parties are expected to clash over a number of contentious issues, including money for welfare programs, and in particular, a plan to offer free childcare, as well as funds for the president's Creative Economy initiative. While the ruling Saenuri Party will look to keep the allocation for the Creative Economy initiative intact, along with measures to boost the nation's economy, the opposition will be aiming to make cuts worth of some $4.5 billion to those initiatives and allocate more for welfare programs. Under a law revision passed last year, if lawmakers fail to reach agreement on the budget bill by the end of November, the draft proposal without changes will automatically be submitted for a vote to the full parliament on December 1st. Although both camps have vowed to meet the November 30 deadline, it remains to be seen whether they can do it without running into any major obstacles. Lawmakers have passed the budget on time only 6 times in the nation's parliamentary history. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the global headlines we're following on this Monday morning here in Seoul. For that, we turn to Eunice Kim, standing by the news centre. Good morning, Eunice.
Good morning, Mark.
Now, unfortunately, we have to begin with news of yet another horrific video released by the group that calls itself Islamic State, as well as extremely graphic footage of several Syrian soldiers being beheaded. It also shows that American hostage Peter Kazig met a similar gruesome fate. Now, as you might expect, US President Barack Obama has condemned the murder of Mr. Kazig. He called it an act of pure evil.
Right, difficult times for those who loved Peter Kazig, as Washington did confirm that video in fact showed the 26-year-old aid worker earlier this morning. You may remember him from a previous execution video released by IS warning of his coming demise. President Obama honored the Muslim convert, also known as Abdul Rahman Kazig, as a humanitarian who worked to save the lives of Syrians injured and dispossessed by the Syrian conflict, unlike IS, whom he described as bent only on sowing death and destruction. Kazig was a former U.S. soldier who returned to the region to help Syrian refugees through his aid group, SARA. The Indiana native was captured by militants in Syria last October. This latest video suggested a rush project by a group on the run. The 15-minute clip, which also featured a mass beheading of 18 Syrian troops, capitalized on brutality where it lacked on production quality. It showed a decapitated head at the feet of a masked man who identified it as Kazig. Russian state-controlled TV have aired pictures claiming to prove that Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down by a Ukrainian fighter jet back in July. The satellite images were said to show a Ukrainian jet firing an air-to-air missile in the direction of the ill-fated airliner that had killed all 298 people on board over eastern Ukraine. But several commentators, as well as the U.S. State Department, have dismissed the snapshots as preposterous, crude forgeries. Meanwhile, Dutch officials said Sunday that they have finally begun a recovery of MH17's wreckage after months of delay and conflict. About two-thirds of the victims were from the Netherlands. Several newspapers in Hong Kong have published a court order directing protesters to leave a protest site in Admiralty, seen as a move to clear the way for a police crackdown. The notice was published on Saturday, ordering protesters to leave the CITIC Tower area, which borders the main protest site, as local media reported that thousands of police officers have been put on standby. Such a move is said to be a legal requirement before official action takes place. Sunday marked 50 days since pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong have occupied the financial hub's major roadways, calling for free elections in the territory's chief executive polls in 2017. China has allowed for a vote of candidates vetted by a committee loyal to Beijing. The two-day auction that put hundreds of memorabilia of French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte up for sale is now behind us. And the winner of the iconic bicorn hat was a Korean business leader. According to the AFP, the head of food industry giant Harim made the whopping winning bid of 1.9 million euros, or $2.4 million US. That's including fees. An employee present at the auction said his boss had plans to display the black felted beaver fur topper at the company's new building to show his employees were, like Napoleon, pioneers in their own right. The famous hat is one of only 19 believed to have survived the passage of time, with just 2 or 3 in private collections.
Said that a team of South Korea.
Get connected to Korea and the world. Join us every weekday for the latest developments out of Korea, Asia, and beyond. On air, on your mobile, and online, we lead the way every day. Arirang News.
To try and resolve the crisis in Ukraine, the European Union also offers 15 billion. Now, in some economic news, and the proportion of Korea's exports to Japan has dropped to a record low this year, with most of the blame being laid at the feet of the depreciating Japanese yen. Hwang Jie has the details.
The tumbling Japanese yen is weighing on Korean exporters trying to sell their products to the country. Data from Statistics Korea shows exports to Japan in the January to September period this year stood at roughly $24.5 billion US, accounting for 5.7% of all Korean exports. That ratio is the lowest recorded since the agency started to compile such data in 1966. During the same period, exports to China took up around 25%, while the United States made up 12%. Korean exports to Japan has been on a downward spiral for the past 3 years. Watchers attribute the drop to Korea's move to diversify its export markets and to the falling yen, which was triggered by the Japanese government's aggressive stimulus measures. The yen has lost a third of its value against the greenback since the end of 2012. The weak yen trend strengthens the price competitiveness of Japanese exporters and normally raises Korea's imports from Japan, but that has not happened yet. Experts say that's because of the Japanese exporters that are not actively cutting down their prices on the back of the weak yen and Korea's sluggish domestic demand that is slowing Korea's overall imports. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Now, today is a huge day in the world of finance because the Shanghai Hong Kong Stock Connect program launches this Monday. The program will allow investors in each centre direct access to the other's stock market in one of the most significant openings of China's capital account in around a decade. However, local analysts are concerned it's going to have rather a negative impact on the Korean market. Son Jung-in reports.
China's Shanghai stock market is opening to foreign investors for the first time since it was launched 24 years ago. It's not a full opening, but the new trading link between the Shanghai and Hong Kong bourses will allow international investors eyeing Chinese stocks greater access to the market. From Monday, they will be able to buy and sell over 550 of the largest A-grade shares listed in Shanghai directly via the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Until now, only institutional investors with a secured quota from the Chinese government could invest directly in China's domestic markets, but the new scheme is going to make foreign investment in the mainland a lot easier. And the overseas investors are already flocking in.
Around 150,000 people opened investment accounts in just one day. We expect more security agencies to open accounts for their clients over the next few days.
China's finance ministry announced that foreign investors will enjoy personal income tax exemptions on profits from investments through the Connect program for the next 3 years. Korean analysts say the move will negatively impact the domestic stock market, and they've expressed concerns about possible capital outflows to China. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Now, people here in Korea now have a much wider selection of fruit to choose from at their local supermarkets. And while this is great news for consumers, it could spell trouble for local producers of fruit here in Korea. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
Fruits of all shapes and sizes from all over the world can now be seen at local supermarkets here in Korea, meaning consumers have a wider range of products to choose from. These include the more conventional fruits like bananas, grapes, and oranges, to less common varieties such as grapefruit, papayas, and dragon fruit.
The fruits at this local supermarket are all fresh and cheap. I don't distinguish between whether they're imported or local.
According to local supermarket data, the market share of imported fruit is growing, rising to nearly 40% so far this year. When we break it down into months, imported fruit accounted for over 45% of the local fruit market in February, and imports even surpassed local fruit in April. The most popular fruits were bananas, grapes, oranges, cherries, and kiwis. Other fruits like blueberries and melons have also seen a huge surge in sales.
The variety and quantity of imported fruit has jumped significantly. They're also relatively inexpensive, so many consumers are choosing them.
One of the reasons for the rise in the popularity of imported fruits, in addition to the variety, is that people's perceptions about imported food are changing. And what all of this means for local fruit producers is that they're facing some tough competition that's not likely to die down anytime soon. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, this next story shouldn't come as too much of a surprise if you've ever been to Korea. A new poll has found that almost every Korean adult owns a smartphone. US-based travel agency Expedia says 94% of Koreans it asked possess a smartphone. This to top a list of 25 countries surveyed. Korea was followed by Mexico, Hong Kong, Singapore and Thailand. Japan actually recorded the lowest rate at just over 50%. While Koreans had the highest ownership rate, the survey found the companies they work for don't provide them with the gadgets, and they generally pay for them out of their own pockets. In fact, less than a fifth of Koreans surveyed said their company had supplied them with their smartphone. Now, from smartphones to smart homes, and it's smart home is one of the most promising areas of the Internet of Things, in which everything we touch and interact with is connected to the World Wide Web in some form or another. At first, companies were quick to hook up home appliances such as TVs and vacuum cleaners to the net, but now they're exploring products that aren't traditionally electronic at all. Things like furniture. Kim Ji-yeon has this week's Industry Insight.
Korea's largest telecommunications operator, SK Telecom, has partnered up with the country's #2 furniture maker, Hyundai Levart, to produce smart furniture. The devices will allow users to enjoy multimedia content from applications downloaded on a wireless network and will be available on both the iOS and Android operating systems. SK Telecom says it's the first company in the world to create smart furniture, and the development is in line with its goal of providing better smart home services amid the Internet of Things, where objects are being increasingly connected to the web.
We thought that connecting the furniture most commonly used by homemakers would be a great way to expand the market of the Internet of Things, because they're mainly going to be the ones using smart home services.
For example, users of this kitchen shelf can check produce prices or look up a recipe while listening to the radio. The shelf is also compatible with existing smart home devices that open or lock the front door and control room temperature. But these devices are not just for users who spend most of their time at home.
This is one of my personal favorites, the dressing table. It's very convenient for workers like me who have to get up and rush to the office every morning. I can quickly check the latest news and my schedule while I do my hair and makeup. And there's sensors embedded in the mirrors, which are touchscreen. So it's also Bluetooth enabled, so I can receive and make calls or listen to my music using my smartphone.
The development of other kinds of furniture, including smart beds and sofas, is also underway. Smart furniture will be available for commercial use by the end of this year and will be released to the public next year. SK Telecom and Hyundai Levart say they hope to raise $45 million in sales of smart furniture by the year 2017. And the climate for their business looks bright due to the rising demand for smart home devices. Back in January, the CEO of U.S. tech giant Cisco Systems, John Chambers, said he saw the Internet of Things as a $19 trillion opportunity. The U.S.-based Consumer Electronics Association predicts sales of smart home devices will increase to nearly 36 million gadgets in 2017 from the current 3 million. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
And a good Monday morning to you all as we kick things off with the 2014-2015 ISU Short Track World Cup, which began its new season. And as for two-time Olympic champion Lee Sang-hwa, there's no one better when it comes to the 500-meter event. Now, with Lee Sang-hwa winning her first gold medal at the event on the 14th after coming in at a final time of 38.07 seconds during the first 500-meter event, she comes back 2 days later and finishes first once again, this time with a final time of 37.92 seconds for her second gold medal. A great start to the new season as she's set to compete once again in the next World Cup event set to take place here in Korea. Now over to China this time with the badminton duo of Lee Yong-dae and Yoo Yeon-sung, who competed in the China Open. And after claiming the title last season, they come back a year later and did it again. Now going up against the 8th-ranked Chinese duo of Hong Wei and Chai Bao, Lee Yong-dae and Yoo Yeon-sung cruises through in straight sets, 21-14, 21-15 for a 2-0 victory. The duo who won the Korea Grand Prix in Jeonju last week will look to win the Hong Kong Open set to begin on the 18th. And now shifting over to golf and over to the KLPGA, where it came down to the final tournament of the season for the Rookie of the Year to be named. And what was a tight race between the three super rookies in Baek Kyu-jung, Ko Jin-young, and Kim Min-sun. 19-year-old Baek Kyu-jung finishes highest amongst the three during the KLPGA Chosun-ilbo POSCO Championship and clinches this year's KLPGA Rookie of the Year honors. Now, in addition to 2 KLPGA titles this year, Baek Kyu-jung also won the LPGA KB Hana Bank Championship, which took place here in Korea. And now very quickly finishing things off in football, Lee Kwang-jung's U21 Korean national football team, who's taking part in the Four Nations tournament in China, faced off against Brazil on Sunday, but failed to score in the 3-0 loss, giving up 2 goals just in the first half alone. And now with that said, that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Well, early sprinkle has all let up here in Seoul, while some areas down south are still receiving some precipitation, which should all let up very soon and will turn to a brighter afternoon. But temperatures will not respond fully. Daytime highs are expected to be slightly cooler than yesterday, barely rising to teens, and wind chill will add a bit more chill to the air. So let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The daytime high in the capital will rise to 10, while Daegu tops out at 14, and Gwangju and Busan will climb to 13 and 16 later on. And as for the other regions, Jeju and Daejeon will be getting up to 14 and 12 later on, and Dokdo will see a highs of 10. Now, temperatures will drop to -1 here in the capital, knowing seasonal average for this time of the year for daily lows at about 2. And we'll wake up to cold morning tomorrow, but there shouldn't be any dramatic changes in temperatures this week. That's all for now. Back to you, Mark, in the studio.
Well, thank you ever so much as always, Jian, and that's all we have for now. We'll be back with our next newscast at noon Korea time. Until then, goodbye.